Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Russ Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. You know that college basketball is back in full swing when the Champions Classic is right around the corner. And even though we've had a couple of big college basketball games already, this is the first time where college basketball gets back front and center, where people are paying attention to it with the Champions Classic. And the four teams that are always in the event is Duke and Kentucky and Michigan State and Kansas. And they have given us some great games over the past decade. Michigan State and Kentucky are 5-8 in this series, whereas Duke and Kansas are 8-5. And this year you got Duke facing off with Kentucky and Michigan State facing off with the Kansas Jayhawks. I'm going to go over these two games and preview and predict which teams I think will become victorious in the 2024 version of the Champions Classic. Now, to start off with the first game, we got the Duke Blue Devils and the Kentucky Wildcats, which most people would probably say is the headline matchup this year, since both of these teams are currently ranked in the top 25, and they do both have a lot of talent on their team. But this year, instead of Kentucky normally being like Duke, having a ton of five-star freshmen, it's a little bit of a different type of talent for Kentucky. Now that John Calipari has gone off to the Arkansas Razorbacks, and he's got much more experienced talent on his team this year, whereas Duke, it's still a bunch of five-star freshmen. They do have a couple of experienced guys, but most of the team is what they've been doing for the past 10 to 15 years with Mike Krzyzewski and now Jon Scheyer, where it is a bunch of really talented one-and-dones that are going to have a lot of success, but still, they're very young and inexperienced, so maybe this will be a game that they can trip up in, since Kentucky does have that more experience on the team, even though a lot of these players did come from smaller schools now that Mark Pope has become the head coach of Kentucky. Duke is favored by 7.5, which is not a surprise. When you look at their roster and how they've played so far this season, they have played Maine and Army to start the year, and they blew out both of those teams. That's not a surprise at all whatsoever, but their roster is so talented. Con Newpel and Cooper Flagg are the standouts so far this season for Duke, both freshmen. Cooper Flagg, most people think he is going to end up being the best freshman in college basketball this year. He's already had a couple of highlight-worthy moments, even though the competition Duke has played is not that great. It does seem like, as well as he is playing, that it's going to translate against an opponent like Kentucky, but there could still be some growing pains with his first tough opponent that he's going to face. Tyrese Proctor is an experienced guy in the backcourt for Duke. He's back this year. Zion James was a transfer. He's playing well so far. Caleb Foster is a good player. Mason Gillis, the Purdue transfer, is having a good start to the season so far for the Duke Blue Devils. Kaman Maloch, he was the talented guy that came from Africa, a very, very important piece for Duke this year, coming from the center position, has big shoes to fill with some of Duke's talented bigs that they've had in the past. Overall, I think that Duke, like I said, is a very young team, but I love all of these really talented players. All of these young guys are having great success so far this season. I'm just going to be intrigued to see how they will do against their first tough opponent. Whereas Kentucky, it's a new look team. All of these guys are not familiar faces for the Wildcats. Koby Brea, the Dayton transfer, he was the best three-point shooter in college basketball this past season when it comes to statistics. He shot like 51% from three, which is absolutely ridiculous. He's having a great start to the season for Kentucky, and they've only played Wright State and Bucknell. So hard to gauge from those opponents how good Kentucky actually is. Same with Duke's opponents. And then you have Otega Oweh coming over from Oklahoma. He's playing well. Looks like he might outperform what he did at Oklahoma this year at Kentucky. Amari Williams, the transfer center from Drexel. You also have Jackson Robinson coming over. Both of the centers have been playing really well for Kentucky so far this season. They're going to have a much tougher test going up against Duke's talented front court. Then you got Andrew Carr as well, the Wake Forest transfer. All of these guys have experience. And then you see Lamont Butler. We know he was a very talented guard at San Diego State that had tons of success in the NCAA tournament with them. I like this Kentucky team. Look how balanced it is all across the board. Even Ansley Almanar has 10 points per game and only 13 minutes. So he has been a key player off the bench as well. And Brandon Garrison, another forward for Kentucky, averaging 6 points per game in 19 minutes. And then you have Colin Chandler and Kirk Kriisa, who haven't even done too much for Kentucky yet, but both are experienced guards. Colin Chandler coming over from BYU along with Mark Pope, and Kirk Kriisa obviously played at West Virginia and Arizona. But Kentucky's team, just so talented all across the board, but it's just not the same type talent. It's not the jump off the page, jump out at your screen type of player. It's more of a just experienced talent, a bunch of players that didn't really have the high school notoriety of the type of player that Kentucky normally gets, but more guys that you can rely on to get you big wins in games, and they have had success at lower levels. Most of these players have had. So I really like this experienced team. I do think that Duke's talent, though, being the more of the athletic type of talent and the youthful talent, it's going to really jump off the page at Kentucky. And it is Bart Pope's first big game as the Kentucky head coach. There's going to be a lot of pressure here. I think Kentucky has a shot. I really do. With their experience, I think they will push Duke to the brink. But I will pick the Duke Blue Devils to knock off the Kentucky Wildcats 78-74. I think it's going to be a really close game. Kentucky's not a bad defensive team, but they did give up 72 to Bucknell. Duke can be a little bit vulnerable on giving up points as well, but I do think Duke's talent is going to be just enough for Kentucky. But the Wildcats are going to play very well and still look like a top 25 team despite losing. Then in the other game, you got the Michigan State Spartans and the Kansas Jayhawks. And with Michigan State, they have been trending down the past few years. Tom Izzo has been the bastion of consistency as a head coach and college basketball, winning the national title at Michigan State 2000, and they've made over 25 NCAA tournaments in a row. You cannot fault Tom Izzo at all whatsoever for his coaching ability at Michigan State. He's done a fantastic job there, but last few years they have been losing more and more games. They've been more of a team that's been squeaking into the NCAA tournament rather than being a high seed. And when you look at their team, they have talent, and they got guys that probably will be in the NBA one day, but all across the board, they definitely are probably the worst of the four teams in the Champions Classic yet again this year. Jaden Akins is a good player. He's been getting better year over year. I really like him in Michigan State's team, and Jackson Kohler's getting better as well. Chase Richardson's been a surprise player for Michigan State this season. Young guy, but playing very well. Frankie Fiddler, the Omaha transfer, has lived up to the billing so far. But then guys like Xavier Booker and Cohen Carr, they have to get better for Michigan State, along with Jeremy Fierce. They're young guys, but they are talented. Xavier Booker was a five-star freshman, and he's only averaging 5 points right now as a sophomore. He played last year, and he just needs to get better for Michigan State. These recruits need to hit for Tom Izzo, and they need to start performing to their talent ability and level if they're going to be able to have a top 25 team this season. And Michigan State, in their first couple wins against Monmouth and Niagara, they've looked pretty good. But like I said, it's Monmouth and Niagara. You really have a hard time taking away too much from those type of teams. I like Michigan State's play. I think they have a good backcourt. I think they have some still young talent that is developing. They need to develop fast and in a hurry. Going up against the Kansas Jayhawks, who already have a big win. Out of these four teams, Kansas did play Howard in their first game, but they have a massive win over North Carolina at home. Yeah, North Carolina pushed them to the brink, but Kansas did ultimately hold on. And in that first half, Kansas was blowing out Carolina. So at their best, Kansas is dangerous and almost impossible to stop. And at their worst, they can be beat, even though they didn't lose to Carolina, but Carolina's a really good team as well. And I don't know if Michigan State is anywhere near the caliber of North Carolina. So Michigan State is going to have to play an elite game to give Kansas a shot. Kansas is favored by a pretty hefty amount. And look at this roster. Zeke Mayo coming over from South Dakota State with the Jackrabbits. He's playing fantastic, playing even better than expected, kind of putting up Dalton Connect numbers right now at Kansas. Maybe that won't hold throughout the season, but he's playing very well. Had 20 points per game in his first two games of the season and played very well against Carolina. Hunter Dickinson, though, is a familiar opponent for Michigan State. Michigan State needs to use what they know against Hunter Dickinson when he was at Michigan and be able to try to contain him as much as they possibly can, but he's still averaging 18 and 8. He's a very experienced player, playing very well. KJ Adams is getting better overall as a player, averaging 11 points per game. Flory Badunga, and 14 minutes per game is 11 points per game. Such a talented freshman, and almost looks like he's already ahead of Xavier Booker is for Michigan State, even though he's been in college for an extra year. AJ Storr, only averaging 9 points per game so far, the Wisconsin transfer, but he's a very talented player. Don't be surprised if he has a big game. DeJuan Harris, an experienced guard, averaging 8 points per game. Down with his assists, but still playing well. Then you got Rylan Griffin, the Alabama transfer, only averaging 5.5 points per game, but he is still a dangerous player for the Kansas Jayhawks. He was really good at Alabama last year. So overall, Kansas has a deeper team than Michigan State. They have a more talented team than Michigan State. And both coaches are great. Bill Self is one of the best coaches in college basketball. Some would say he is the best coach in college basketball if it wasn't for Dan Hurley. That is debatable. And Tom Izzo, he's up in the top 5. He's a great coach, done a fantastic job at Michigan State, even if maybe they have some more limitations in some of these other programs on being able to recruit at a high level. But I just think overall that Michigan State has talent, but enough of their players have not hit. They have not really developed enough yet to this point where I think they would be able to knock off a really great team in Kansas who has experience and young freshman talent. Give me the Kansas Jayhawks to knock off the Michigan State Spartans 82-70. I think Michigan State will keep it close for a while, but Kansas will go on a run at the end to be able to pull away and be able to win their championship classic game against Michigan State this year. But those are my picks and predictions for the 2024 Champions Classic. I always look forward to the Champions Classic because, like I said, college basketball is back in full swing when these four programs play each other early in the college basketball season. And then when you get to the Thanksgiving games during Feast Week, that's always fun as well with the Battle for Atlantis and all those other tournaments that are going on, the Maui tournament. Those are always fun to watch as well. But definitely can't wait for the Champions Classic. And let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about my picks and predictions for these two games and which teams you think will win and whether you think that maybe Kentucky or Michigan State will be able to pull off an upset or if Kansas and Duke will roll as they are expected to. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.